Once again, we're back with Missionary Minds, and this is part 2 of our episode from last week, Friday. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoy.
So we need to make sure that when we define this, for example, as the feminists like to do, by saying that the wife is the head of the husband, we can't take it that way. Although, to balance it out, this is not speaking about all men and all women. So when a woman is walking down the road and a man comes up to her and says, do this, this, and this, and she says no, as she ought to, that man cannot claim Ephesians 5:23 for his cross-reference.
So thank you for clarifying that and clarifying the different positions. So if I'm to try and summarize this in my mind, are we saying that outside of feminists, you basically have complementarians? So it's one and the other, right? Two sides, two views, complementarians and feminists?
Maybe that's a little simplistic. Generally, you speak about egalitarians versus complementarians, but I think there might be able to be a third view, although the second and third view, like I said before, practically would come to the same position. I know that some people would define verse 21 when it says that we are to be submissive to one another. Basically, they would define it as humility. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think we need to define verse 21 when it says subject to one another. That is, we are to be subject, or we are to be submissive to one another within our proper roles. So imagine this, Carney. You're looking at a room full of people, and you've got kids in there, and you've got women in there, and you've got husbands in there, and you have men in there, and all have their different positions. I could look at them and say, be mutually submissive. But I don't mean by that the mother needs to be submissive to her child. And I don't mean that the husband needs to be submissive to the wife. I mean, all of us are to be submissive within our own roles. And I think that's what verse 21 is saying. Verse 21 is saying that we ought to place ourselves underneath the authority of another person, whoever that may be. So ought the husband to be humble with his wife? Of course. Are there many times where the wife says, let's do this, and he says, absolutely? Ought he to be humble with his children? Yes. Are there times when the father says, I want to do this, and the children say, I really want to do this? And when he puts all things together, he says, okay, we'll go with what the child says. Yes, absolutely. But I wouldn't say that he's being submissive to them, that he's not putting himself underneath the authority of the wife or of the children. We need to remember that humility and lordship are not mutually exclusive. Jesus is Lord and rules and reigns over his church. We shouldn't say things like, well, instead of being the ruler of the home, a husband should be a servant. Phrases like servant lordship or humble rulership or meek supremacy appear as oxymorons to many Christians today. However, this is exactly what the Bible teaches. We are to be the lords in our home, husbands. We are to be the rulers in our home, husbands. Fathers, we are to be the supreme authority in our home, while at the same time, we are to be servants and meek and humble, just like the Lord Jesus Christ. The Lord Jesus Christ was Lord. He was ruler, and at the same time, he was humble. So to wrap all that up, that section up, Carney, I would say, verse 21, be subject to your particular authority, whoever that may be. And then we come to verse 22, and then it moves into specifically what this looks for with the wife.
All right, Boti Paul, when I hear you talk about all of this, it seems like really technical content. We've been in the classroom of Missionary Minds today, and I hope to get my degree certificate after this. But for a moment, let's step back and look at the Schleierlein household, or maybe other examples of couples you've counseled or seen. What does submission look like? And what does humility from a husband look like? What are some day-to-day examples?
Okay, so let me give the first story that comes to mind. my wife and I were traveling back to our home here in Bokota Village, and I think we were using a rental car. So I was not used to looking at the fuel gauge in that car as I normally do. And we passed through Polokwane, which is kind of like the major city, an hour and a half south of us. And we're making great progress. And then I noticed probably about, I'd say 15 kilometers out past this city that we were way low on fuel. And I actually pulled over the car and turned it off because I had a decision to make. I do not want to drive back 15 kilometers. And so I'm looking on Google Maps and trying to figure this out. And I determined that we're going to go and we're going to find a fuel station. Although it didn't technically have the fuel station on the map, I just had a feeling there was a fuel station and we could make it. And my wife said, no way, we got to go back. We're going to have to walk for fuel if we don't go back. And we kind of went back and forth responsibly, wisely. We just kind of worked through the issues. And in the end, I said, we're going forward. And my wife said, okay, we're going forward. And we drove, I think, the rest of the time in silence. Now, I don't think there was silence between us because we were angry with each other, but she was thinking, I think this is the wrong decision. And she's thinking, do we have a fuel container? How are we going to do this? And I was thinking in my mind, calculating every kilometer and backup plans and plan B and plan C. And all the while, and finally, we reached the fuel station and we probably just rolled in with fumes. And in my mind, I was sweating it big time. But on the outside, it was, hey, we got this. I communicated to her, I knew we were going to make it all the way. And my wife, as she so often does, she said, you're so right, dear. You're so right. I think that's the idea. In the end, I wanted to do A and she wanted to do B. There has been many times, hundreds of times in our marriage where I wanted to do A and she wanted to do B. And when we put everything together, I said, you know what? I think you're right. Let's go with B. I think that's wise. I think that's what the Lord wants. But there are times when I've had to say, we're going to do A, for example, in that particular matter. And she did right. She submitted. I have the final authority. I'm the leader of the home. I'm the Lord of the home. I take the full responsibility. I think she handled that correctly. And I think I handled it correctly in that I said, look, in the end, we're going this route and this is the way it's going to be. Now, in mutual submission homes, I don't even know how you'd figure out that situation. I think the wife would probably throw a fit. She would say, I'm not going along with this. I'm going to walk the rest of the way. She's going to pressure the husband until the husband lowers his head and just follows what she wants to do. That's unbiblical. He needs to be the leader of the home. That would be kind of a practical example. Is that what you were looking for as kind of a practical example of what that looks like in the home? And I could probably give many more examples like that in the home of what are we going to do with schooling the children, or what do we do for a holiday, or what time are the children going to go to bed? And we work through these issues. We talk through these issues. But in the end, the wife is responsible to place herself underneath the authority of the husband. Now, what that means, those who are listening, who are not yet married, when you understand what verse 22 is saying, verse 23 is saying, verse 24 is saying in chapter 5 of Ephesians, when you really understand that, you better make sure that you're marrying the right kind of person. And you better make sure that you can follow who you are marrying. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to say, I will follow this man. I will submit to his leadership. I will obey him. And then man who's not yet married, this woman that you're thinking about taking as your bride, is she the kind of person who will happily submit to you? There's no mutual submission. Verse 21 is not teaching mutual submission. Is she going to submit to you And as I've told you many times before, Carney, and I've mentioned other people, there needs to be kind of some practice times during your dating period or courting period, whatever you want to call it, where you test her. We're going to go to such and such a place for our dinner tonight. And she gets all excited. And then what happens if she suddenly decides, no, I want to go to this place instead? And you say, no, I decided on this. We're going to go to this particular place. How is she going to handle that? Is she going to throw a fit, etc.? Those are things that you need to kind of vet and ferret out before you're actually married.
Thanks, brother. And if you can talk to us a bit about what it looks like for the man to be the Lord, the leader of his home, but still balance it out with humility with his wife, because some wives are very capable and maybe
like my wife.
exactly, and they have a lot of good ideas. They can run things really well. What would you say to a husband who feels like, man, when I think through things, it always seems like she's right on things, so I feel like I'm just doing what she says, and so I'm tempted to just constantly choose my ideas, not because I think they're the best, but because they're my ideas. I want to try and get a foothold on this. What would you say to a husband like that?
One thing is you need to grow in your wisdom, because if she's always got the best ideas and you don't, it's time to put down the Xbox and to put down the TV and say, I need to read a book on leadership by Dwight Eisenhower, or I need to learn how to make better decisions, or I need to really grow when it comes to how to fix the car. Or even right now, I'm thinking about myself when it comes to finances. Like, I'm really trying to grow in my understanding of investing, etc., because my wife's really good there, and I want to give some clear thoughts. So grow. Men ought to constantly be growing in their understanding of the world, so that one of their responsibilities is to lead the home with wisdom. But at the same time, yes, there are millions of women around the world that are very intelligent, very capable, very wise. And my wife says to me often, I just love it when you ask my opinion on things. And I hope I'm the type of person that when we make a decision, I say the same phrase, and my wife knows what this means. I say, hey, can I talk to you in the bedroom for a minute? That's our thing, because we don't want to work through these things in front of the children. Let's talk in the bedroom for a minute. We'll go to the bedroom and I'll say, all right, I'm thinking about this and this and this. What do you think? And she will say, great, dear, I think that's great. Or, oh, I don't think that's a good idea. And then we'll kind of push back and forth. She loves it when I ask her advice. I think that's what one flesh means. I think that's what the Bible encourages husbands and wives to do. We kind of see a little example of that with David, although he wasn't yet married to Abigail. David was going to do A, and Abigail comes in and says, do not do A. You've got to do B, which in this case, don't take revenge and kill my husband. That was the best advice. And she gave reasons for it. So I would come to wives and say, don't try to strong arm your husband. If you want your husband to follow what you have to say, give him reasons of why he ought to do this instead of that. That's what Abigail did. If you take revenge and kill my husband, you will have blood on your hands, and as a king, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And David, in his teachability, said, you're right. I'm not going to do that. And in a sense, he if you want to use the word submit, I won't use the word submit. I would just say he listened to Abigail. And when Nabal eventually died, who do you think David's eyes were on? This kind of woman who could give that kind of sound advice. And then kind of to reverse it a little bit, if a husband is not happy with how often his wife is pushing back on him for decision A or B or C, I would just say stack success as much as you can. The more you stack success, the more you make the right decisions, the more easy it is for her to follow. And hey, I think there's a Twitter, like, what's it called? W's for dudes or something like that. Stacking your W's or something, where it's a Twitter account where it's a bunch of guys and they're successful in this particular thing. And like, that's a W, that's a W, that's a W, that's a win, that's a win. Not in a prideful way, but I definitely kind of present my W's to my wife so that I give her confidence. So I let her know, don't forget who chose all the vehicles that we drive. And they were good purchases. Again, this is not in an arrogant way, but I'm just trying to put you at ease. And if she was here right now, she would be nodding her head, say, yep, yep, yep. Don't forget who got this piece of property and who made the big purchases. And remember, we were debating if we would go at this time or this time. And I said this time and it worked out. I'm not perfect. I make decisions. When I make decisions, I make some mistakes. But when she sees the W's, when she sees the successes, she's going to more happily follow what you say. So husband, don't expect your wife to happily go along with A, B, and C when the previous 5 decisions you made were really bad. She ought to push back on you, stack the W's, and you're going to have a submissive wife.
And that's a great example you give. I've had the privilege of witnessing you in your home. And as you said, your wife is wonderful. She has a Midas touch with many things. Many things she touches turn to gold. But you are rightly showing yourself a man, and you're rightly showing yourself a leader, and you show yourself capable by how much you strive. And she has a wonderful submissive spirit. And I've had a joy just being in the Slayline home. Maybe for one of the last questions, something that can hinder, something that can hurt a man's ability to lead with so many young men is financial prowess of their wives when their wives are still working. And with many young homes, they're trying to establish themselves. So both of them are working. And what would you say to a young man who says, man, I struggle to see how I'm going to lead because she is self-sufficient. She brings more to the table than I do, financially speaking. How can I work through this? How can I still lead confidently when I'm with a lady like that?
Wow, what a great question. My first response is for the man to do the best he possibly can. And I almost view this more a little bit in the role of the woman's side to make this happen. If the man is doing the best he can, he's earning the most he can for all practical purposes, then I think the wife has to affirm her husband. So I've just, in our own situation, my wife is a stay-at-home mom. She loves being at home. She does not earn another income, but she was making buku bucks in the US, and she was just making an incredible salary working in the hospital, some of the nicest hospitals, not only in the US, but around the world. And we made a decision very early on. She was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And so we didn't really have to work through her income and my income ever. But one of the things she does so well is she always says to me, you just do such a great job of providing for our family. She says it all the time. You do such a good job of providing for our home and for our children. And I try to affirm her in her role as a stay-at-home mom so that she doesn't have that gaze that's looking to the corporate world and say, I miss that and I miss that income. I try to affirm her in her role and say, you're doing such a great job as a mom. The meals you cook, you could never do this. You could never educate the children if you were working outside of the home. Another thing that she does, and I would just encourage women to do this. Let's say you're in a situation where, just for argument's sake, you know the right thing to do. And let's say, for argument's sake, your husband might not know the right thing to do. One option is, we need to do this. You don't know what you're talking about. I know, etc. But another option, and again, my wife's done this often, where she'd say, what do you think we should do in this particular situation? She asked that, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm not quite so sure what we should do. But she knows the right direction, but she'll state it kind of in a question way so that she's not being bossy. And she'll say, okay, well, I was thinking there's this option and there's this option. And it's almost like she's using kind of the Socratic method, instead of just teaching the students. It's like, I know what the answer is, but I'm going to ask enough questions to lead them to the right question. My wife's done this a number of times. It's just so sweet. It's humble the way she does it. It makes me think of, Sarah and Abraham, 1 Peter 3. This is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. It communicates that idea, that attitude, and it makes decision-making easier when we, in a sense, I make the decision. But there's been a few times where she just kind of led me along because she knew better. And I'm not saying that wives have to put up this grand game just to protect the ego of the husband. Look, men, be humble. If you don't know, just say, I don't know, and she'll come along and help you out. But there are times when the husband is helped, when the wife comes along with a humble attitude and just kind of leads him to the right decision.
Brother, it's evident my wife has been discipled by your wife, because I too know of that question method, and my wife humbly comes along and encourages me as a man. Sometimes I end up feeling like I'm the one who came up with the answer because of that. It's wonderful. So you're saying there that the onus is on the wife here, not to stamp on the man's leadership, but to encourage him in it. So she takes on a beautifying submissiveness under him so that he doesn't have to struggle with those things?
Yeah, I mean, look, the common phrase is never ask a woman her age and never ask a man his salary, because we as men, we're proud, we have an ego, and maybe I'm trying to present this in the best way. I'm saying our role is providing for our home, and we want to do really well at that. I'm talking about the best of Christian men. We want to do really well at that. And so a part of that is our salary. We want to provide the best we can for our children and for our wife. And for some men, that's going to be a high salary. For some men, that's going to be a low salary, but he's doing the best he can. For some men, it might mean so low of a salary that he's just going to have to suck it up and work a second job. Or it might mean, no, actually, the salary we're making is really good, but the reason that we're having such a hard time is because we're comparing our salary to our neighbors or to our friends, and they've communicated to us, you need X, Y, and Z. I've often thought in homes, especially in the US, when the women say that they have to work, I think what they mean by that is they have to work in order to keep the same standard of living that they're used to, rather than saying, so we have one vehicle, like that might be the best thing that we can do. I would say in this case, man, do the best that you can, provide for the home, and then woman, affirm what he's doing, and then do the best you can with that particular salary.
Keeping up with the Joneses is a recipe for discontentment and struggle in the marriage. What a treat, Mufundhisi. To our audience, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to rate it and subscribe to keep posted with more upcoming content. Feel free to share this episode with someone who might find it interesting, and submit any questions you may want answered in a future podcast. You can email those questions to paulslayline@gmail.com. You can also visit betweentwocultures.com for other resources like this. I'm your host, Yamikani Katunga, and until next time, that's it from Missionary Minds.